This is quite an occasion on Dreamland because William Henry has been working towards something, at least since I have known him. He has been working towards something that he has finally achieved. And there is going to be a whole new level of work with William Henry unfolding over the next few years. But this is the foundation. It is extraordinary, it is an amazing achievement, and it is terribly exciting. Welcome to the show, William Henry, co-conspirator, co-host, and expert, perhaps leading expert in the field of what did the ancients know about the soul that we do not. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Whitley. It's great to be on the end of the phone here with you.
Well, it's exciting that things are always when things are turned around like this, and for such an extraordinary reason. William, before we get into Morph and what morphing is, I want to go back, if I may, to the first moments when you realized that you needed to do this, because there was a beginning. Now there's a new beginning. What was the first beginning?
Well, I always go back to that time when I was a sophomore in college. I was going to be an entertainment lawyer, and I was here in Nashville going to a small Southern Baptist college that had a music business degree. It would prepare you to become an entertainment lawyer. And the catch was that being a small Southern Baptist college, you had to take Bible study classes in order to follow through on the program. And in 1982, there was a best-selling book that came out. One of my professors had assigned us to review a book whose implications would impact Christianity. Went to the bookstore, and there sat the brand-new copy of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, fresh off the press. And I started looking through that book, and before 30 seconds were up, I knew that I had something in the palms of my hand here that was going to utterly change my life. And as I continued to dive into that book, I got hooked on this idea of this parallel mystery tradition, this true religion of Jesus and Mary Magdalene rather than the descriptive religion about them. While one half of the religion talks about stories and tells descriptive narratives about what they did, there's another whole aspect of it that's hidden, that's mysterious, that represents ultimately their specific instructions for how we actually become these Christ-like beings that the Christian message tells us that we are to become.
Wow. So this is where it started, and you began what turned out to be a long and quite a unique struggle because you're very controversial. What you do is not what others do in this field entirely. There's a particular thing that you do involving language. Could you explain this to us a little bit? Why it's so different from what others do?
Right. Early on, and I get letters about this all the time, in fact, so thanks for bringing it up. Early on, I learned about this alchemical language called the language of the birds. It was said to be the original pre-flood language spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We're told that King Solomon utilized this language. We're told that the alchemists utilized this language. And what it is, it's a thought process, really, that connects or puts together seemingly disconnected words, phrases, objects, even whole concepts. And it's based purely on using English as a code language. In other words, if words sound alike in English, no matter what language they come from, no matter what time period they come from, they could be linking seemingly disconnected subjects. And people go crazy with this. They tell you it's completely nonsensical. It's illogical. In fact, they say it's wrong. But one thing they don't ever say is that I'm using it and it works, because they never try it. And once you try it, as many of my readers have, they start to be able to plug into and see the connectedness of everything and see that there is, in fact, this one mind. There was a one story that we're all part of, and we're all trying to put it back together. And, in fact, English may well be the key or the code that enables this to happen.
Now, of course, being a Texan, I can't forget the infamous story of Ma Ferguson. the governor of Texas back in the 20s, who said if English was good enough for Jesus Christ and the 12 tribes of Israel, it's good enough for the school children of Texas.
Are you serious?
Yeah, when she was being asked to add Spanish as an alternate language in Texas schools. Now, English wasn't around back then, or was it?
You're probably right. I mean, that's probably right. However, to the alchemist, that's okay. I mean, to them, it was around, and you can take it or leave it. It makes no difference to me. I use this and recognize that if you follow the story, that Jesus was said to have been taught this original pre-flood language. The alchemists explicitly state that is English. The specific alchemist in particular is one Fulcanelli, who lived at the turn of the 20th century, was the last person to perform the great work, the Transfiguration, as far as we know, and he explicitly says English is the language of the gods, including Jesus Christ. Take it or leave it.
Now, here's the thing that's fascinating about all of this. I admittedly been a student of William Henry's for a long time. I've read everything he's written. I've seen him speak many times. Mm-hmm. I have listened to you at your DVDs, watched your DVDs, including the incredible new one, and I know there is something in this. But I have to ask the question, how can it be true? Because, Jesus spoke Aramaic. There is no evidence whatsoever of the existence of the English language before the latter part of the Dark Ages. It began to emerge in the 8th and 9th centuries A.D.
That's right. And then Sir Francis Bacon introduced English as a new literary language when he translated the King James Version of the Bible, inventing over 7,000 new English words in order to make that translation. So again, yeah, it's totally nonsensical, but maybe it is true. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying this is what the alchemist said. This is the technique, and I just kind of am playing along with them and utilizing this thought process that the alchemists use to fuse together ideas and concepts that normally you wouldn't ever dream of putting together, such as Jesus and the English language.
And it works.
And it works.
It makes sense. That's the thing about it that's so extraordinary. It makes sense. You know, one of the most unusual examples of this occurred back, and for you subscribers, this is still available in the subscriber section in the special interviews. William and I, right after the invasion of Iraq, we talked about the words shock and awe. Mm-hmm. And how they had been used. Could you tell us a little bit about the extraordinary way that this was unfolding at that time?
Well, I mean, as you recall, back then, when the War on Terror was brand new and they were just beginning to tell us that war was going to last for generations, we soon went into Iraq and we promised shock and awe to the Iraqi people. We would shock and awe them. And what immediately became clear to me is that when you use the language of the birds, the phonetic language, shock and awe is the same as Shekinah or Shekinah, the Hebrew name for the glory that came from between the winged angels on the Ark of the Covenant. And to me, it was Donald Rumsfeld using explicit language to say that the Jewish Lord Yahweh was back in business vis-a-vis the U.S. government, and here comes shock and awe right at the Muslim world.
Now, did he know what he was doing, or did this come from some deeper place?
You know, a better, more recent example of that, Whitley, is Barack Obama. I have, as many people have noticed, Barack Obama shares a striking physical similarity to the Egyptian heretic king Akhenaten.
Yes, he does. It's true. He has the same facial structure even.
Absolutely. In fact, I ran into a friend I hadn't seen for a while. I said, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. He said, no, I got to go make some calls at the Obama office. This was before the election. And I said, you mean Barack Akhenaten? And he said, what did you just say? I said, you know, Barack Obama looks an awful lot like Akhenaten. I just call him Barack Akhenaten. In fact, his story is strikingly similar. Barack Akhenaten was always shown with his daughters in public displays, just like Obama. He's coming up against a corrupt and ruthless military and political structure that seeks to immediately render his demise if possible.
Yes, I sense that too very strongly. I know a lot of people do.
He promises chaos, just as did Akhenaten. Now, John McCain rolls into Nashville a week later with Barack Obama, 100 feet from my front doors where those debates were held. John McCain stands on the stage here in Nashville and says, well, and that one over there voted for this energy bill. Well, I came out of my seat at that moment because in the language of the birds, what McCain was saying is that one is Obama, but that one, or the Atone, was the name of the religion that was reintroduced by Akhenaten, the Atone, the Aton, or the Atone. And here is John McCain saying that one, using exactly the right phonetics, the right syllables to describe a figure I've noted as Barack Akhenaten.
You know,
just to follow it, did John McCain follow through on this? Did he pull it out of thin air? Where's this come from? I think it just resonates, and resonance is the key to using the language of the birds.
There is a shadow living within us. That's what I think. There is something that was once very much not a shadow, that was what I call exquisite instinct. Before we really had in our hearts and souls left the forest, before the fruit of the tree of knowledge had been plucked and we had taken from God the control over our lives that we were previously were surrendered to deity. And in those days, we could do things like build pyramids, and we knew why. We don't know any more. But I think it still lives within us.
I agree, and that's why the alchemists referred to the language of the birds as the language of nature. If you could put yourself in resonance with all that is, you would begin to experience more synchronicities, you would experience this kind of flow, and you would be able to recognize that all that is. Now, part of us, our left brain, seeks to filter and to segregate, and that's why we say there's just no way any English can be related to any previous ancient language, and that you can't, in fact, use English as a way to decode ancient terms, even though Thomas Jefferson believed that was so. He's just an idiot, according to these scholars.
But the problem is this. If you look at this type of scholarship, at what we're looking at in a linear, strictly rational way, what you're doing is you're plucking the fruit from the tree of knowledge.
That's exactly what you're doing.
Exactly. Now, when we get back, we're going to begin to find out about a whole new way of looking at reality. It's called morphing. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Dreamland's unique blend of information and ideas.
As we were talking, Linda Howe's email, which she sends me every week, came in describing what her part of the program will be like this weekend. And I nearly dropped my teeth. Bear in mind, Linda has no idea what this show is going to be about. She doesn't even know that William Henry is the guest, let alone that morphing is involved. Here's what her email says, and I'm quoting now. My news update tomorrow will be about a morphing UFO over Levittown, Pennsylvania, that dropped little squares of light on an apartment yard. Now, I ask you, without her knowing it, but at a higher level, is it not known that we are talking now about morphing and about becoming little beings of light? I think that this UFO event is a communication about this program. I'm sorry, but I'm very close to this these days, and I think we are actually experiencing a communication. Be sure and listen up when we talk with Linda Howe later. It's going to be fascinating.
William Henry's new DVD, Morph, is the outcome of over 20 years of work. In this 4-hour presentation, he reveals just what the ancients did to achieve enlightenment. This has never been accomplished before. Don't miss Morph. Unique in the world and uniquely powerful. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store.
And for you subscribers, remember, you get an automatic 10% discount in the unknowncountry.com store.
Next week on Dreamland, William Henry interviews Robert Schoch. He discovered the true Age of the Sphinx. Now he's exploring the paranormal from a scientist's viewpoint. Don't miss it.
We're back with William Henry, and this is an exciting time because he has come to a new level. The new DVD, how long is it, William, by the way?
5.5 hours. It's
5.5 hours. Okay. They were that is awesome. And I just have to tell you, it didn't seem like any 5.5 hours when I watched this. I can't believe it. I watched it. I stopped for coffee. I may have had, later on we had dinner. It seemed like it lasted about an hour and a half.
It seemed like that when I was giving the presentation. We recorded it here in Nashville in October at the Union Station Hotel where I do my presentations here in town. And I was thrilled to be able to put together this kind of new level of information that I've been, as you mentioned earlier, striving for a long time. And you're right on, Whitley. I mean, I really do feel like I've establishing like the first step at a next higher level with this Morph presentation, because it will represent not only a departure from old stuff and a new beginning, but for me it was an opportunity to put together a bunch of ideas that I've been wanting to express for a long time, especially since last summer when I put out the light body effect, which was kind of the forerunner to the Morph presentation. And I'm very happy to say the light body effect has become one of my most popular presentations. People all over the world have ordered that presentation and are getting just a tremendous benefit out of it, and I hope they'll do the same from Morph.
Well, yeah, I hope so, because I think that it's important to all of us that we begin to try to do this, to actually do it. And you can, folks. I mean, it's doable with this thing. I mean, he really does lay it out. And William, now let's go back to the distant past, and I'm going to ask some hard questions. And I'm going to ask, because I think the answers, while I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to give us chapter and verse, directionally you may be able to come up with something. Now, we have in our world quite a number of artifacts from the distant past. Most of them, their actual historical origins are no longer known. I refer, of course, to the Great Pyramid. I refer to the platforms at Baalbek. I refer to the fortress of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. And there are any number of other such objects that we couldn't build today. We have no idea how it was done. Now, will we begin to be able to understand more if we begin to actually morph in the way that you think we can?
Oh, absolutely. And let me mention that morph is, of course, short for the word metamorphosis.
Metamorphosis, exactly.
Which means a change in form. It's a biblical term. It comes from the transfiguration of Jesus when he took the disciples up to the top of the mountain, and in a moment, like something out of the movie Cocoon, he peels back his skin and reveals that he in fact is a being of light. And the various Gospels describe this event, and they say that the apostles or the disciples were witnesses to Jesus' sovereign majesty when he performed what the Bible calls the transfiguration or the metamorphosis. This was this transformation of Jesus from a mortal man into an immortal, from a human into a God man. And as a consequence, what you receive in the process of metamorphosing in this way is what is called gnosis. Gnosis is a power. It's a gift of receiving understanding and revelation. And part of this understanding that is included in this unfolding is knowledge about the building of these monuments and their true purpose as transfiguration machines, or to use Robert Bauval's term for the Great Pyramid, he calls it a resurrection machine. And so that indeed, when you look at these monuments from the perspective, and these temples, from the perspective that they're aiding in the metamorphosis of these individuals, we can see now that this process of revealing or receiving this revelation also awakens us to the understanding of how those temples work and why they were built.
So we begin to be able to see, and by the way, folks, there's another incredible conversation with William on this week. Ann Strieber talks to him about American right and his discovery that the Capitol building actually works the same way that the Great Pyramid did, which is a phenomenal, extraordinary insight, and don't miss that if you're a subscriber. Now, let's get back to the process of morphing. William, one of the things that I always get, and I have, as you know, been a meditator for a long time, and I get this time and again from people who who do my meditations, and they say, nothing happens. Now, I get many more times a lot does happen. In fact, most of the time it does.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain people for whom nothing happens. Now, what do you say to them? Because I wonder if there isn't some kind of an energy out there that is actually suppressing people's ability to really to start to dance is what it is.
Well, as you may recall, I opened my presentation with a letter that I received from a person who was inquiring about the conference, and he said, I read your conference description. You talked about morphing. You talked about an activation, and he goes on to say that I've been studying this stuff since the 70s. I've been to every seminar. I've read all the books, including the Bible, and he says that it seems to him that his last hope is that someone, somewhere, somehow will do an activation, an integration, a healing, or something, anything that will flip the switch. And so I wrote him back and I said, sir, what you're asking for is the ultimate gift. Only you can give it. And that everything we do in our lives, everything is activating, healing, and helping us to get it. And what I advise this person to begin doing is to stop hoping to get it and to start doing it, to begin to live his life as if this were occurring, and to get a clear vision in his imagination of how his life will be different than it is presently. When he's further advanced in this process of transfiguration, what will that person be doing that his present person is not doing? And then go do those things.
Looking at yourself through the filter of expectation based on knowledge is not energetic at all. It is exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden. And it doesn't say, it says they were driven from the garden, but it might as well say they fell from the garden, because that's exactly what they did. They became heavy because of knowledge. They became heavy with knowledge. We have to live in a new way. William, tell us now, how do you sense that we might live?
Well, for one thing, as Jesus praised Mary Magdalene in the Pistis Sophia, he described her as one whose heart is set on heaven's kingdom more than all the other disciples. And
whose heart is set on heaven's kingdom.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What it meant to me is that she had achieved a key part of what the ancient Egyptian Stargate mystery schools, as I term them, taught, was that we had to achieve a state of light-heartedness. In their judgment scene, they would weigh the heart against the feather of Mot, of cosmic truth and cosmic order. And if the heart weighed less than the feather, then the person was able to continue crafting the light body. And so what this tells me is that Mary Magdalene indeed had achieved this state of light-heartedness, that she might literally have radiated luminous rays of love and wisdom from her being, but that she also, through her deeds, acted as a person that they would describe as perfect. That was the term the Gnostics used for those who were achieving the morph or the metamorphosis, the light body effect, as I also term it. They were perfect beings. Now, perfect isn't something you can get from a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon, as we've been led to believe today.
Yes.
Perfect people act in a certain way. And in fact, I remember recently Paul Newman died. And Sally Field, who is, of course, an Oscar-winning actress and friend of Paul Newman's, responded by saying, God doesn't make too many perfect people, but Paul Newman was one. And at first I disagreed with Sally Field. And then as I continued to read the life story of Paul Newman, I recognized that, in fact, he was not only, by many people's standards, a physically perfect specimen of a male human. He was a star in that way. But
yes.
Then, as you read his biography, he says, one day I just woke up I awakened with the idea of creating camps for children. And that if I started making salad dressing, I could raise millions of dollars to create these, what he called the hole-in-the-wall gang camps for children that are with terminal cancer. That is something a perfect person does. It's a very heartfelt, heart-centered action that he took that demonstrated that he was, in fact, on the path to perfection, as Sally Field indeed said.
I met his wife one time very briefly, and the energy coming from that woman was very extraordinary. She was a powerful and special being, Joanne Woodward. I don't say never, but it's because that wouldn't be true, but I rarely met anybody, and I just drove her around in a car. I was a gopher on a movie back in 1970, and she happened to show up on the set for some reason, and but I never forgot it.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if both of them would have been perhaps spent lifetimes on the path of perfection, because it's not only in this lifetime that we build the light body. I'm a big believer, as you know, in reincarnation, yes. And we're told in the Tibetan tradition that our light body grows with our work and our deeds.
Now, when we come back, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about, because this is something that is made. It is not learned. The craft of making a light body has nothing to do with eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. We'll be right back.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Expert hosts, unique information.
This is Whitley. We're talking with William Henry about the craft of making a light body. His new breakthrough DVD set, 5 hours of exploration of the process of metamorphosis that he has been working toward for his entire journey of life. And here we are at the next step in this journey. Morph. Do not miss it. I urge you, do not miss this. Spend time with it. Have patience with yourself. It is incredibly rich, incredibly valuable. Okay, now, William, it's about finding a way into the light body, isn't it?
Exactly. It's about first imagining it, one recognizing that you are, in fact, in the process of metamorphosis at this moment. We are all in the human body, sort of like the caterpillar preparing to transform into the butterfly. But where most of us are at, or many of us find ourselves, is in that position of a cartoon I saw once where the caterpillar is looking up at the butterfly and says, "You'll never get me up in one of those things."
Yeah.
Because we don't recognize that is our true potential, in fact, the true destination of our soul. And Christianity is in part to blame for this because of its overemphasis on suffering as the way to the afterlife and suffering in this life. Instead of flooding our consciousness with images of transfiguration and ascension, instead we see crosses everywhere. And this is where it has to really begin to change, is that we have to begin to flood our own consciousness with images of metamorphosis. And today go ahead.
That isn't how Christianity started at all. The cross came out of the Council of Nicaea.
Exactly.
So tell us a little bit about what happened, because Christianity was actually captured by a demonic force, I think.
Well, I totally agree. In fact, we've interviewed various individuals on Dreamland that talk about the Archon stepping in and taking over the Catholic Church. And in fact, when you read the Gnostic Gospels, first of all, in the Gospel of Mary, Jesus says explicitly that sin is not an ethical problem; it's a cosmological one.
Yes,
sin is much about arrogance and ignorance of reality, and the only way you overcome sin really is to open the heart. And,
right.
And that's what original Christianity was about. And if you are able to open the heart in this way, you receive an extraordinary power that the Gnostic Gospels call exousia. Exousia, E-X-O-U-S-I-A. It simply means the power. And the Gospels talk about this secret baptism of Jesus that he was doing. And in fact, what he was doing is just simply opening the heart and tuning people into this force called exousia, which I have a sense and a feeling might have something to do with dark matter, and that we're right on the verge of rediscovering that the dark realm is in fact the kingdom out of which we originally emerged and that we will one day return to.
You know, Ann and I and Shirley MacLaine spend a fair amount of time talking about this very subject. And Shirley has the idea that this darkness was present before the light came, and that it feels a sense of entitlement, that it is reality, and God is a kind of a revolutionary or an usurper, which gets us, of course, back to Akhenaten and the cult of light.
They have known this at least since the time of Akhenaten, Whitley. In Morph, I quote Philo of Alexandria, writing around 20 BC, who says, "This light is the one star beyond all heavens, the source of the stars that are visible to the senses, which it would not be beside the mark to call all brilliancy, and from which the sun and moon and the rest of the stars, both errant and fixed, draw their light, each according to its power." I mean, he's clearly talking about a light that illuminates the sun, a light of one that is the ultimate light, the source of all that is. And that's exactly how Akhenaten described the Atan, as this light that illuminates the sun. They weren't sun worshippers. They knew the secrets of this light and the tremendous spiritual power that comes from that place, and they knew that the only way to access that was through the opening of the heart.
The opening of the heart, of course, is absolutely central to the whole morphing process. And it is amazing to me how tightly the heart is actually closed. And William, what closes the heart?
Well, the mind, for one thing. Psychologically speaking, I subscribe to this idea that we all have a male and a female side. And traditionally, what the male feels like his primary responsibility is towards that female side is to provide and to protect her. The female side being the mystic, intuitive side. And the way that the male side finds to protect that inner female side is to keep her alone and isolated. Okay? The language of the birds is a real good example of that. The female side says, "Wow, that's a really intriguing idea. If there's a language or a code that can connect me with all that is, hey, I want to be a part of that." The male side's response to that would be, "Don't be ridiculous. There's no way that you can use English as a code language to explore any language except English." And so we have this conflict within us at all times, and I think that that male side very often overpowers that female side, that mystic intuitive side, keeps it alone and isolated and keeps us locked in place. And what has to happen is that the male side has to see that bringing a balance between the male and the female side will actually create greater protection and greater prosperity than keeping the female side on the sideline or isolated.
Well, of course, this is so fundamental to our society. Our society is a male society. It is the male side in action. The female side has very little room to maneuver and room to express itself in human society and as it exists today, at least in the Western world.
That's right. And so as a consequence, how many people do you know that have actually transfigured in the past 2,000 years?
Not many. What would it be like? What would it be like to transfigure? How would we know someone had?
Boy, that is a really great question. I mean, we look to the Tibetans, and they give us these eyewitness accounts of their lamas who transfigure or achieve what they call the great perfection by accelerating the vibration of their body into what they describe as the rainbow body. That's the closest that we have of examples of one who is actually transfigured. In fact, I'm really hoping you and I might have to write this movie, or maybe you'll write it, Whitley. Hollywood is right now got the technology to be able to demonstrate transfiguration for us on the big screen in a way that would be absolutely, I think, just civilization shifting.
Yes, but unfortunately, then you have to deal with studio executives. Unless you can get a star so big that they can't say no, that will not happen. That movie will not be made.
Right.
So, absolutely not. Because they're afraid of everything. I know them well. I know many of them personally, and fear rules in Hollywood. There's a reason that people out here actually call it Hellywood. Hellywood, yeah. Now, William, this experience I've had two people in my life who I think may have been transfigured. One, of course, was the master of the key. And one of the things that first led me to you was the shocking similarity between things he had said to me and things you were saying in your early books. It was just remarkable. And I thought to myself, my God, who is this guy from Nashville who's got this? Because many of them were ideas I had never heard before. However, there was another individual in my life. He was in my life for quite a few years, and he started out by, I first encountered him in my meditation room in my house in upstate New York, and he was not visible, but he was very clearly there to the point where I couldn't continue to meditate because you can't. I mean, you try meditating with someone you know is there, but you can't see. It's not going to work for long. And I went to bed, and I finally said, if you want to meditate with me, you have to show yourself. And I went to bed, and I fell asleep. And about 2 hours later, in the middle of the night, I was awakened by someone punching me on the shoulder. And I opened my eyes immediately, because this is the way the Greys used to wake me up all the time. And I thought it was maybe one of them, because they could be invisible and yet present. But instead, there was this tiny man. He was human looking, wearing a little tunic, and he was sitting at the foot of the bed, very, very still, just leaning against the back of the bed. And I knew why, because some of the Greys are like this. The least movement will literally propel them into another vibration, and they just disappear before your eyes. And so I went down to the foot of the bed, and I touched him. I lifted his hand. I knew he would not move, that I would have to do all the motion. His hand was like a little sparrow. It was so soft and light. I smelled his skin, and he smelled powerfully human. He was like someone who was from a world where they never bathed. And that began years. From there, we meditated together. Sometimes he would be in the room, sometimes not. And he came with a group of others like him that I never saw. And finally, I'd lost the house. We were leaving for the last time the next morning. We would never come back. And I asked him, please show me yourself as you really are, because by that time I knew that form was more like a memory than a real form. And what I saw then was a being of purest light. And when the rays of light penetrated my body, it was like being with a friend, like they were his living presence, like they were speaking to me in some way, or becoming part of my soul. It was a incredibly profound thing. Now, we're going to go off the air for a couple of seconds and listen to a few important messages, especially about getting Morph in your hands and also keeping this website rolling, because we need you, boy. Believe you me, this is expensive stuff here, and it's important. It is serious wonder. That's what we do on Dreamland. And when we get back, we're going to find out from William what he thinks about that being that I saw and lived with in my life.
You're listening to Dreamland. Serious wonder spoken here.
We're back, and I'm talking to William Henry about his mind-bendingly extraordinary, important, and exciting new DVD, a 5-hour presentation that will revise the way you are if you let it. If you do not eat of the tree of knowledge, but instead let the fruit fall where it may, you will gain real energy from this. I am convinced. William, before we left the air, I asked you to tell us what you thought was happening to me when I had this relationship with this being. Could you tell us a little bit what your reaction is?
Yeah, it reminds me of actually a couple of comments that I have in Morph, a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna on Mount Meru, for example. Krishna is talking about this divine being and describing it as a sublime friend that is in each one of us. And so it strikes me as possible that maybe this was a part of you. That would be one kind of take on it. But then also in the Mahabharata, we learn that there are these perfected royal seers. That's the name that holy book gives to these transfigured beings, perfected royal seers. These are self-awakened humans who have transformed themselves into light beings, light spheres.
Yes.
And a third comment, I mentioned the Gospel of Philip earlier, one of the other Gnostic Gospels, and it says in there explicitly that the rulers of the archons do not see those who wear the perfect light, and they cannot seize you.
I think they can see me, William.
I think they can see you, but they probably couldn't see your friend.
He seemed profoundly free. And I'll tell you something else about him, folks, by the way, if you're interested. He was the most morally strict person I have ever known. He used to examine me and my conscience constantly. And anything that looked amiss, we explored in great detail. It was a real journey through my whole life. And I recognized it finally for what it was, a release of weight. I was dropping luggage as I went along, and believe me, I haven't dropped it all. We all have lots and lots of luggage. And this relates to Anne Streber's experience when she had her near-death experience and found herself in a room full of other souls, all sitting there with great piles of luggage. This is what Western culture's doing to us. Mm-hmm. We end up loaded with luggage. We're trying to take our big screen TVs and our fancy cars and all of our resentments and all of our angers and all of the weight of the material world on our souls as we leave. William, can you get us past this?
Well, I can point you in the direction. Jesus talks explicitly about this in the Gospel of Luke when he says, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it?" Prosperity thinkers think that what Jesus is telling you is that you need to save up before you go buy that washing machine at Walmart. Don't buy it on credit. Save up before you actually go buy it.
You know, a lot of people needed to read that about 2 years ago, and they're called bankers.
Right, exactly. But when Jesus is talking about the tower, to me, he's either talking about his wife, whose name was Mary Magdalene, which means the beloved tower, or he's talking about the tower that we all talk about all the time, the Tower of Babel, the ladder
tower of destruction in the Marseille Tarot.
That, or the tower or stairway to heaven. And the way I interpret this is what Jesus is saying is that if you want to build this light body, you better make sure you're ready to pay for it, because it is going to cost you everything. Every relationship, every bit of luggage that you've been dragging around, you're going to have to leave it behind. Because the only way to become perfect in this way is to become free of all your earthly attachments, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally.
Like Meister Eckhart says, become as a clear glass through which God can shine.
Exactly. That's my meditation. I am clear. My voice is clear. My thoughts are clear. My energy is clear.
It doesn't have anything to do with Scientology, by the way, folks. Those of you who know Scientology, this is so far removed from that.
Right.
It's unbelievably far removed. We just happen to be using the word clear here. Okay.
And that's the thing is that you're right. It will cost you everything in order to accomplish this. And that's why perhaps so few do, because we all want to hang on to our luggage. We want to hang on to our baggage. We like our stuff. We get accustomed to it. But what we have to be shown is a vision of a life free of that stuff. And that's what I'm attempting to put forth for people, is to motivate them by saying, look, if you put your energy and emotion on developing this higher aspect of yourself, it's not only going to make your earthly existence all that more pleasant and pleasurable and blissful, but it's actually going to aim you at the true source of where we come from and ultimately lead you to the place where you've been working so hard to get to.
And we have a situation where it's interesting. You noticed, folks, just a brief reference back there when he was talking. It's very, very important to go back to it, though. The reference to the Stairway of Heaven and the Tower of Babel being more or less the same thing. You eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That is to say, you seek to control your life, to take God's place in your life, not to be surrendered to your life. Then it's the Tower of Babel. If you drop the fruit, it's the stairway to heaven. It's all energy. One energy, another energy. It depends on how you vibrate, how you approach it as to what it will be in your life. Does that make sense to you, William?
Totally. And again, it's all about getting these images of what a higher vibrational life is like. What are you capable of doing? And what powers of the soul begin to emerge if suddenly you devote your life towards metamorphosizing it in this way, metamorphosing and becoming this transfigured, apotheosized being.
The thing that I find in your work, the most fascinating thing about it is is the dedication that it shows to actually achieving some kind of transformation. Do you think that the energy of the universe around us is changing at all? Because for many, many thousands of years, we have not been helped. We have been in the grip of something that's been getting heavier and heavier and heavier. People say, oh, well, when they talk about aliens, they say, oh, well, if they were a much more advanced species, then they would be also ethically more advanced. I don't think so. I think that the opposite is true on Earth, because this is a planet, after all, that is still recovering from the scars of the Holocaust and the world wars of the first half of the 20th century and the nightmare of communism, all of these dreadful things. This darkness is everywhere, and it's closing around us, William. What do we do?
Well, for one thing, let's just talk where the rubber meets the road financially. Again, Proverbs states that the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is slave to the lender. And if now we're in a situation where our government is deciding who is actually going to be able to get money in the form of loans, then what it's telling us is that we're entering into an age of not just socialism, but actually fascism. And so
yes.
One thing that you definitely want to be focused on is becoming debt-free, because debt-free is one great step forward that we can all achieve, some of us perhaps quicker than others, that will put us on the path towards sovereignty.
Right.
That's one form of freedom right there that we all need to be working on. And I stress that because, again, in the words of Jesus, he says, so if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches?
And what does he mean by true riches?
The powers of the soul, the light body, the ultimate way that we achieve freedom, liberty, and sovereignty. And so it's important for us in our financial relationships in our daily lives as well as with our government that we begin to focus on becoming free of that system, and recognizing that freedom will enable us to access true riches within us, new ideas or inspirations within us that will enable us to open up the powers of our soul.
So if you can pay your debts, pay them now, because there will come a time soon when none of us will be able to pay our debts. But believe
then we're
me,
slaves.
They will not be forgiven.
That's right. Now then we're totally enslaved. And so here's
right.
This isn't to shock people, but this is the real reality that we're up against right now, and this is why I'm on such a passionate path right now to accumulate as much of the knowledge about the light body as I possibly can at this moment, because this window might not be open much longer.
It's going to get very hard.
It is, and I take comfort in knowing that the knowledge that I receive and the powers of the light body transfer from incarnation to incarnation, and the work will continue from lifetime to lifetime, but right now, it's accessible, but that might change.
Where are you, William, right now in the process of transformation?
Well, for one thing, I'm debt-free. For another, I am focusing more and more on a daily basis on this process and networking, especially with more and more people who are perhaps even further along down the road in this than I am, and dedicating my life to the achievement of the light body. And
so you work with this in some way. Do you meditate, or what do you do?
Yes, I meditate in a very simple way. I expressed my meditation a moment ago. I am clear. My energy is clear.
Right.
My thoughts are clear. My intention is clear. And I also flood my imagination with images of transfiguration. They're always on my desktop. I'm constantly now working through this process and trying to put together as many pieces as I possibly can.
You notice that he never said anything about gathering knowledge. There's a lot of difference between flooding your imagination with images of transformation, transfiguration, and gathering knowledge. This is not about knowledge. It's about being. And it's about always, as he said earlier, the balance between the feminine side and the masculine side, and finding that balance within ourselves in a world that is moving into a period of darkness and storms unlike anything we have ever known before. My friends, this has been an extraordinary experience for me talking with William Henry, and all I can say is, may the peace that comes from this be with all of you as well. What an experience. William, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Whitley. It's been my pleasure.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, Linda Moulton Howe has arrived at last, and at the top of the show I told you I was fairly sure that she had not the slightest idea what this program was about. Is that true, Linda?
Absolutely. I had no idea.
And you are going to be talking about what?
About aerial craft that morph, changing shape, and emit what appears to be small little squares of light more than once down onto a backyard, an apartment in Levittown, Pennsylvania, leaving biophysical and biochemical changes in a privet bush and a silver maple, the likes of which biophysicist W.C. Levengood has never seen before in his career.
Okay, so that's what it's going to be about. Now, we have just finished talking with William Henry about morphing, transforming into beings of light, talking about his new DVD, Morph. All right, and I said at the top of the show, I thought perhaps this was literally some kind of a higher level communication. And now, from Communication Central, where you get the facts that I am telling you for sure nobody else has, comes earthfiles.com and Dreamland star reporter Linda Moulton Howe. Here she goes.
And I agree, Whitley. It is as if there is a convergence, a crossroads that comes with Earth Files, with Dreamland, sometimes with Coast, and now William Henry. Sometimes I feel the same way with Jim Mars, that we are not in communication with each other, and yet we come together in a certain program or even a conference, and everybody seems to be resonating around the same subject. And this year of 2008, if I had one word to say about the unusual high strangeness in the skies, not only in the United States but around the world, it would be projections of light in color and patterns doing strange things that captivate human attention and awe. And today I have a report that goes back to a phone call to me on July 13th, 2008. It was from Robert Gardner. He's the MUFON field investigator living in Philadelphia and does work with MUFON, Pennsylvania. Bob wanted to know if I knew any scientist who could analyze, and his word then was glitter, that had fallen from a pink-colored aerial disc over an apartment complex in Levittown. Bob had talked with an eyewitness who first left him with the impression that literal physical sparkling material had fallen onto a privet bush growing next to the female eyewitness's apartment. After I asked questions in order to get physical material prepared for a scientist to receive it who helps me with energy dispersive spectroscopy and other laboratory tests for identification and microscopic analysis, Bob Gardner learned that there was no physical material. He had misunderstood. But the eyewitness wanted to know what might have happened to the privet bush growing next to her apartment door because she had seen all of this, what we're now calling little squares of light, falling onto the privet bush, and she was alarmed that she found a dead bird near the privet bush the next day after the April 20th, 2008 first dramatic encounter with these glittering pieces of light falling from a disc. Later on, the female eyewitness's daughter would also see the same aerial craft. By July 20th, a week after his first phone inquiry, Bob gave me a phone update about his progress in trying to understand the complexities of a case that involved half a dozen morphing, changing UFO appearances over the same apartment and yard between April and July of 2008 by this object that would come in, usually, as a boomerang, bluish-white. Then it would change, while this eyewitness was watching, to a pink disc shape that would then, later on, flash 3 oval lights on its bottom surface. And from April until June 12th, she had seen this happen, the morphing, twice. And then on June 12th, it took on a whole different dimension having to do with these little pieces of light. Now, I'm just going to quickly go over dates and times so you get a sense of this. The woman hears her dog barking at 3 a.m. for the first time on April 20th, 2008. She gets up, doesn't know what's wrong, walks out with her dog, and there, up in the sky, is this blue-white boomerang. And to her complete astonishment, she watches it change before her eyes to this pink disc. She estimated then, on April 20th, 2008, that this object was about treetop level, maybe a mile or less away from where she's standing outside in the courtyard of her apartment complex. 1 month later, in May, at 2 a.m., same kind of thing. The dog is barking. She gets up. And here again is the boomerang, bluish-white, changes into this pink disc. And she didn't call anybody. She didn't report anything until we get to the third event on June 12th, 2008, starting at 1 a.m. Eastern Time. Levittown is about 13 miles northeast of downtown Philly, as you would take the Delaware River going up about 13 miles. So it's very close to a very large city. And here is an event. You can go to Earth Files and you will be able to see both photographs taken of the privet bush, her apartment, her actual own digital image of one of the shapes when it was morphed into the boomerang shape. It's quite fascinating. And her sketches and drawings of what it changed into and what it looked like now on this very pivotal night of June 12th. She estimated now that the object, which starts out as a boomerang, is about 60 to 100 feet from where she is. It's closer than the previous 2 times. And she sees the pink disc suddenly on the bottom surface start flashing in these 3 ovals, bright. And to her amazement, for the next 20 minutes, she estimated. At first, she thought it was something like silvery tinfoil in little squares falling. It was not a beam, but they were falling in a confined shape that reminded her of a pyramid, if you can imagine this. That they weren't scattering all over in the air, that they were staying in a pattern like a pyramid. And they fell not to the ground, not onto the leaves of the privet bush that she was close to, nor a silver maple that was 65 feet away, but both of these plants become very involved in the science we're going to talk about. She watched these little silver pieces of light fall down to about 3 feet above physical interaction with the ground or anything else. But it looked as if the privet bush and the silver maple were surrounded by whatever was emanating these glittery pieces of approximately 1-inch squares of light that she compared in a beautiful way, in a metaphor, trying to explain to Robert Gardner later on, because I asked him, what have we got here? She told him, sitting in her house, her apartment, where Bob could see with his own eyes that she had crystal glasses in a wine case, and the light from above that lighted inside of her little wine cabinet was glinting off of her lead crystal glasses. And she looked at the glint from that lead crystal and said to Bob, what I saw falling looks like the glint of that light off of that crystal. Now, this happened a fourth time, and the fourth time was on July 8th at 4:10 a.m. Again, it is her dog that keeps waking her up. This time is when she gets her digital camera and she gets the photo. She had more than one, and I am been allowed to use one of the boomerangs. Then on the fifth event was July 10th, again at 2:45 a.m. The dog waking her up. This time she calls her daughter, who is in the complex, but away from her apartment. The daughter gets up. She sees now the object morphing, but she does not. The daughter does not see the little glittery light. And then on July 16th, 2008, a sixth event between 1 and 4 a.m., and that is when she sees the constant morphing of the boomerang into the pink-colored disc and the various kinds of light effects, and she takes 18 images and 6 short videos with her Kodak Easy Share camera, all of which has been under a proprietary agreement with a television producer, and this will be on television November 24th of 2008 in a Discovery program about this Levittown series of events. Well, now, Bob didn't have silver glitter, but I asked him if he would be willing to gather samples from the privet bush and the silver maple tree and another silver maple tree that was further away as a control and get them to W.C. Levengood. He FedExed. I kept talking with Levengood, who kept telling me, I am seeing the most remarkable changes on these leaves. And I'm now going to share with you an excerpt from a very long conversation with W.C. Levengood, who I have been working with now for 17 years approximately on doing physical analysis of soil and grass and plants in crop circles, animal mutilations, and this case in Levittown, Pennsylvania, of these falling, strange, glittering little squares of light and the impact that they have left on the biology of the privet bush and the silver maple tree has really got W.C. Levengood, University of Michigan background, baffled.
I'm going to call them beamed energies because right now we don't know what else to call them. Okay, these energies were very powerful. They punched holes right in the leaf, both the privet and the maple leaf. So these holes were not characteristic of insect damage. You have a tree, I don't care what the variety is, you can take a leaf from it, and you'll find about 1 out of 5 leaves has 1 or 2 holes in it. These are caused by chewing insects. They chew a hole right through the leaf. But what was not present in these leaves that were hit by these energy beams was the fact that there was no excrement, there were no egg casts, there were no cocoons, there was no evidence of chewing. In fact, some of the holes in the leaves were almost square-shaped. And around the holes, in every case, in both the privet and the maple leaves, there was a thin line or thin border of this reddish-brown anthocyanin. Anthocyanin can form under very high energy exposure of the leaves.
Which can be sunlight or
microwave or electrical energy. These were lesions or damage to the plant that could not be explained by insects. In one case, there was a hole about 1 millimeter in diameter. It was cut through the leaf, and the center part that was cut out was still there. It was just hanging by a couple of threads. The center part also had a border of red. One segment had an area of the anthocyanin, and in the outer hole, the rim of that also had anthocyanin. So I knew that they were all tied together. And there was another one, extremely unusual. It was a lesion that was very, very precisely exposed on the plant. It was a line just like you take a ballpoint pen and take a ruler and draw a line with the ruler across the leaf with your ballpoint pen. The width of that line, the energy beam, was only 1/10 of 1 millimeter wide. The way I found those, I noticed that some of the leaves were folded up, just like folded over and seal the envelope. I've seen that before, and always when you open that up, in every case I've ever seen before, there was a cocoon from the insect that's called leaf miner. But I opened it up, and what do you know? No indication of insects whatsoever. But what caused it to fold up was one of these lines that are obviously put down at very high temperatures and at very short time interval, probably over a microsecond. And the heating caused the cells to expand. It caused the formation of anthocyanin, this red line. I've got photographs of it where it passed through the midvein on a leaf. So what's going on here? We've got things that indicate that there are laser beams only 1/10 of a millimeter wide, probably of a microwave nature, that can cause these lesions in the leaf.
And you've never seen this before?
No, I've never seen anything like this before.
Did you find that the affected leaves were only on the outer tops of the trees?
Yeah, that was a very important aspect here. The influence of the energy beam on anthocyanin production, on abscisic acid, and so on, was expressed far more evident on the upper side of the leaf than the bottom.
The energy must have been coming from above to the top leaves, and that the lower ones were shaded by the upper leaves?
Yes. And the outer leaves, the young leaves, this is why so many of those abscised and not the inner leaves. I kept those limbs after that leaf fall on my bench because there were a lot of leaves left on that. All the leaves that remained were mature leaves, which is just exactly the opposite of the way it would happen in nature. The senescent leaves would drop first because they're no longer producing food for the tree.
So it was the younger leaves that were exposed to the energy, and they are the ones that sort of were affected like fall dropping leaves.
Yes, exactly. I saw evidence on those inner leaves. They weren't free of the effect, but it was to a much lesser degree, and occasionally you could see pretty clearly that half of the leaf was shaded by the leaf above, and the bottom half was affected by the energy beam.
What kind of energy could produce all of this evidence on the privet and the silver maple?
Well, we've got to realize here that this is one damn complex energy. First of all, the abscisic acid is formed and known to increase dramatically because of high radiant energy. And I mean by high radiant energy in the infrared or microwave. And what happens here, there are two isomers. An isomer is the same chemical. The molecule has the same number of atoms, but they're arranged differently. And it flips one isomer from one way to the other. And the active isomer can now affect metabolism in the plant to a much greater degree than the isomer number one. We know that microwave energy can cause anthocyanin production, but from some work I did back in 1967, right here in the lab, I probably was the first one to discover in hybrid corn kernels that are totally yellow. If I expose those to an electric field, very modest one, like 50 volts per centimeter, I got a flux, the production and rapid transfer of anthocyanin up the corn kernel. If I reverse the electric field, it comes from top to bottom. So this molecule has a very high ionic charge, positive ion. And so it migrates rapidly through the cells of the tissue and can be formed by an electric field. And this anthocyanin effect can be very, very specific, confined to a very, very small region, which we see here. Some work that we did back in 2005 from a crop formation in Hillsboro, Ohio. There were just as unique energy formations in that as we find here in the tree leaves. This was in sweet corn formation where the corn was down by the vortex energy, plasma energies, and the ears in the affected down plants all looked like they had a purple skull cap. The rest of the kernel was still yellow. And this is an amazing selection of energies, whereas the normal control ears, of course, showed no anthocyanin whatsoever. So I'm just mentioning that to demonstrate that every kernel on that ear, even the very immature ones down at the tip of the ear of corn, showed that little tiny purple spot. An amazing effect. Of course, here, even to begin to understand this pigmentation on corn kernels, it was absolutely necessary to consider the role of anthocyanin in plants. And there I think that electric field was involved, and I believe it was involved here. And as it turns out, we have very strong evidence from the Pennsylvania energy beam that it was an electric field took part in this. And we end up with microwaves, probably infrared energy, and an electric field.
What makes Pennsylvania so extraordinary is that neither the mother nor the daughter ever saw a beam. All they did was see like a snowfall.
There are many, many lasers that operate in the infrared. And who's to say they can't turn it from the region of the spectrum that we can't see with our eye to a region we can see? If you take a laser beam that's, let's say, out in the ultraviolet or beyond the visible into the X-ray region, and you suddenly lower its energy, you'll suddenly find it's in the visible region. If this had been little square beams of light, when they hit the leaves, I would see that, although I'll admit some of those holes in the leaves have a square shape. When she said they suck the beams back up or suck the particles, that merely means they're switching back to a different wavelength, and they're no longer visible, and they sort of withdraw this energy back to their source. It's a bright white light that does not leave shadows.
Is it fair to say that if we are dealing with a beam that is not visible to the human retina and was depositing like snow falling in flakes on these trees, these glittery little squares, that this is a complex energy system and technology that we have no knowledge of on this earth now?
I'd say that already. On one of these leaves, big maple leaf, it was still essentially intact, but I noticed it'd been riddled with this energy, so I took a backlight picture of this, and my God, it looks like somebody took a shotgun to it. There are lines, there are streaks, there are holes, and they're all bordered with this anthocyanin. So if there'd been some square beam or something, the beams that created these lines, tenth of a millimeter, I don't think we can figure out what this is. I'm not that good at quantum physics.
And if it keeps on going, what in the world would be so special about this privet and silver maple that this technology would keep coming back?
I agree with you there, and I sure don't have any answers to that. Why do they select these people and these trees? And it's like they're teaching us. But I guess we're slow learners.
And where is it all headed?
Yeah, that's true. But it's interesting. I don't think I can't see anything here that's malevolent, and I never have in my work with all of these phenomena seen anything that's malevolent. So, or benevolent, for that matter.
here is that whatever was the interaction with these little squares of what appeared to be light, it fell into biophysical and biochemical changes on the privet and the maple tree in three basic areas. One, abscisic acid, was accelerated in June and July. That's summer, that's not fall, causing the leaves to have a buildup of abscisic acid, made the young leaves fall off of the branches. Secondly, there were these lines, of which I have great photographs, showing these lines of anthocyanin on these otherwise green leaves of June and July that should not have any anthocyanin on them. It means they were exposed to some form of radiation to produce these effects. And the third area, which is more complicated and more subtle, has to do with some variations in the changes on some of the privet leaves, as though there had been repeated exposure to energy that affected the rate of cellular growth in the leaves. That is biophysicist W.C. Levingood's hypothesis. All of this now comes down to there is no question of physical evidence of biochemical and biophysical changes to those plants in the Levittown, Pennsylvania case. We don't have answers yet about what are these little glittering squares of light. Why would they come back at least 3 times, dropping this material onto this backyard of this apartment? And while Levingood and I were exploring and talking about this research, here is something that he and I found in the Science Journal dated April 18th, 2008, under this headline, Condensed Matter Physics, quote, the mad dash to make light crystals. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program in the Pentagon, is now putting out a large amount of money to try to get more people to study the optical interference of laser beams directed inside of a crystal. It turns out that an optical lattice can be created that emulates the ions in a crystal, and this would involve atoms hopping between spots emulating electrons. And when they do that, Whitley, they give off sparkles of light. And DARPA is after this technology that it is calling light crystals.
Well, maybe they need to go to Levittown. There were glowing cubes seen in July also over the UK, according to a story I'm looking at in Unknown Country. Linda, we have come to the end of our
time. That connects or puts together seemingly disconnected words, phrases, objects, even whole concepts, and it's based purely on using English as a code language. In other words, if words sound alike in English, no matter what language they come from, no matter what time period they come from, they could be linking seemingly disconnected subjects. And people go crazy with this. They tell you it's completely nonsensical, it's illogical. In fact, they say it's wrong. But one thing they don't ever say is that I'm using it and it works, because they never try it. And once you try it, as many of my readers have, they start to be able to plug into and see the connectedness of everything and see that there is, in fact, this one mind. There was a one story that we're all part of, and we're all trying to put it back together. And, in fact, English may well be the key or the code that enables this to happen.
Now, of course, being a Texan, I can't forget the infamous story of Ma Ferguson, the governor of Texas back in the 20s, who said if English was good enough for Jesus Christ and the 12 tribes of Israel, it's good enough for the school children of Texas.
Are you serious?
Yeah, when she was being asked to add Spanish as an alternate language in Texas schools. Now, English wasn't around back then. Or was it?
You're probably right. I mean, that's probably right. However, to the alchemist, that's okay. I mean, to them, it was around, and you can take it or leave it. It makes no difference to me. I use this and recognize that if you follow the story, that Jesus was said to have been taught this original pre-flood language. The alchemist.
This is quite an occasion on Dreamland, because William Henry has been working towards something at least since I have known him, he has been working towards something that he has finally achieved. And there is going to be a whole new level of work with William Henry unfolding over the next few years. But this is the foundation. It is extraordinary, it is an amazing achievement, and it is terribly exciting. Welcome to the show, William Henry, co-conspirator, co-host, and expert, perhaps leading expert in the field of what did the ancients know about the soul that we do not. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Whitley. It's great to be on the end of the phone here with you.
Well, it's exciting that things are always when things are turned around like this, and for such an extraordinary reason. William, before we get into morph and what morphing is, I want to go back, if I may, to the first moments when you realized that you needed to do this, because there was a beginning. Now there's a new beginning. What was the first beginning?
Well, I always go back to that time when I was a sophomore in college. I was going to be an entertainment lawyer, and I was here in Nashville going to a small Southern Baptist college that had a music business degree. It would prepare you to become an entertainment lawyer, and the catch was that being a small Southern Baptist college, you had to take Bible study classes in order to follow through on the program. And
sense. You know, one of the most unusual examples of this occurred back, and for you subscribers, this is still available in the subscriber section in the special interviews. William and I, right after the invasion of Iraq, we talked about the words shock and awe. Mm-hmm. And how they had been used. Could you tell us a little bit about the extraordinary way that this was unfolding at that time?
Well, I mean, as you recall back then, when the War on Terror was brand new and they were just beginning to tell us that war was going to last for generations, we soon went into Iraq and we promised shock and awe to the Iraqi people. We would shock and awe them. And what immediately became clear to me is that when you use the language of the birds, the phonetic language, shock and awe is the same as Shekinah or Shekinah, the Hebrew name for the glory that came from between the winged angels on the Ark of the Covenant. And to me, it was Donald Rumsfeld using explicit language to say that the Jewish Lord Yahweh was back in business vis-a-vis the U.S. government, and here comes shock and awe right at the Muslim world.
Now, did he know what he was doing, or did this come from some deeper place?
You know, a better, more recent example of that, Whitley, is Barack Obama. I have, as many people have noticed, Barack Obama shares a striking physical similarity to the Egyptian heretic king Akhenaten.
Yes, he does. It's true. He has the same facial structure even.
Absolutely. In fact, I ran into a friend I hadn't seen for a while. I said, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. He explicitly state that is English. The specific alchemist in particular is one Fulcanelli, who lived at the turn of the 20th century, was the last person to perform the great work, the Transfiguration, as far as we know. And he explicitly says English is the language of the gods, including Jesus Christ. Take it or leave it.
Now, here's the thing that's fascinating about all of this. I admittedly been a student of William Henry's for a long time. I've read everything he's written. I've seen him speak many times. Mm-hmm. I have listened to your DVDs, watched your DVDs, including the incredible new one, and I know there is something in this. But I have to ask the question, how can it be true? Because, Jesus spoke Aramaic. There is no evidence whatsoever of the existence of the English language before the latter part of the Dark Ages. It began to emerge in the 8th and 9th centuries A.D.
That's right. And then Sir Francis Bacon introduced English as a new literary language when he translated the King James Version of the Bible, inventing over 7,000 new English words in order to make that translation. So again, yeah, it's totally nonsensical, but maybe it is true. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying this is what the alchemists said. This is the technique, and I just kind of am playing along with them and utilizing this thought process that the alchemists use to fuse together ideas and concepts that normally you wouldn't ever dream of putting together, such as Jesus and the English language.
And it works.
And it works.
It makes sense. That's the thing about it that's so extraordinary. It makes.
In 1982, there was a best-selling book that came out. One of my professors had assigned us to review a book whose implications would impact Christianity. Went to the bookstore, and there sat the brand-new copy of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, fresh off the press. And I started looking through that book, and before 30 seconds were up, I knew that I had something in the palms of my hand here that was going to utterly change my life. And as I continued to dive into that book, I got hooked on this idea of this parallel mystery tradition, this true religion of Jesus and Mary Magdalene rather than the descriptive religion about them. While one half of the religion talks about stories and tells descriptive narratives about what they did, there's another whole aspect of it that's hidden, that's mysterious, that represents ultimately their specific instructions for how we actually become these Christ-like beings that the Christian message tells us that we are to become.
Wow. So this is where it started, and you began what turned out to be a long and quite a unique struggle because you're very controversial. What you do is not what others do in this field entirely. There's a particular thing that you do involving language. Could you explain this to us a little bit? Why it's so different from what others do?
Right. Early on, and I get letters about this all the time, in fact, so thanks for bringing it up. Early on, I learned about this alchemical language called the language of the birds. It was said to be the original pre-flood language spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We're told that King Solomon utilized this language. We're told that the alchemists utilized this language. And what it is, it's a thought process, really.